Okay, the last thing we want to do in this section is use what we've learned about radical and rational equations to solve some formulas for a variable. So, for example, here we have x equals the square root of 7 over wz, and we want to solve for w. So we want to get w on a side by itself. So we kind of have to think, well, what's stopping w from being on a side by itself? And here, the bigger thing we see is that, well, it's under a square root. Well, how do we get rid of a square root? We're going to square both sides. So that's going to give us x squared equals 7 over wz. Now, the next thing we notice is that it's under a fraction. Well, how do we get things out of a fraction? We multiply by the least common multiple. And here the least common multiple would be wz, since that's our only denominator. So we're going to multiply both sides by wz over 1. And on the left-hand side, we just get wzx squared. And on the right-hand side, we just get 7. Okay. Now, we have w times z times x squared. So we really need to move the zx squared. Well, kind of how is it linked to w? It's being multiplied by w. And what's the inverse function of multiplication? It's division. So we need to divide both sides by zx squared. So that gives us w equals 7 over zx squared. So we have solved for w. And you may think, well, why do we even want to do that? And maybe you're in a situation where you're going to be using a formula over and over and over again, and it's in one state. So maybe you have it like x equals the square root of 7 over wz. But you're going to be solving for w. Then it's helpful to get w by itself. That way maybe you could just plug in numbers for z or x. Okay, 2 here we have b equals the square root of c over d minus 9. And we want to solve for d. Now again, d is under a square root. So we need to square both sides, but before we do that, we need to get the square root by itself. So we're going to add 9 to both sides. That gives us b plus 9 equals the square root of c over d. Now again, to get rid of the square root, we need to square both sides. So that's going to give us b plus 9 squared equals, now squaring gets rid of the square root, c over d. Now, d is in the denominator again, so we're going to have to multiply both sides by d. So on the right-hand side, it cancels out, and what we're left with is d times b plus 9 squared equals c. And we want to solve for d. It's always helpful if you kind of get lost in all of this to look back and say, okay, what am I solving for? Here we're solving for d. So we need to divide both sides by this b plus 9 squared. So our final answer here would be d equals c over b plus 9 squared. And you know you're done when you have the variable that you're solving for on a side by itself. Okay, the last one here we have 1 over a equals 1 over b plus 1 over c. And this is a rational equation we want to solve for c. So we need to multiply through by the least common multiple of a, b, and c, which would be a, b, c. So we have 1 over a equals 1 over b plus 1 over c, and we want to multiply through by abc over 1. Now let's see what happens. This first term, the a's cancel out, and we're just left with bc. The second term, the b's cancel out, and we have ac. And the last term, the c's cancel out, and we have ab. Okay, so look back to what we're solving for. We're solving for c, which means we need to get all of the terms with the c on the same side. So we're going to subtract ac from both sides. So that gives us bc minus ac equals ab. Now we have C in both of those terms. What we can do, we're going to factor out the C. So C times, from BC we would get a B, minus from AC we would get an A. Okay, now this looks very similar to what the last step we've done in the previous two. We need to divide both sides by B minus A. It cancels out here, and we get C equals AB over B minus A.